We made it to the end of the week together. Congratulations. It's the Matt Sager podcast on Friday, November 30th. We also made it to the end of November. Not too shabby. So, present on my mind is a piece of relatively good news and a really tragic piece of news, one that I knew was coming, but you're just never ready for it. It may have come up once or twice over the course of this podcast. If you're a longtime listener, you're probably aware that I was raised in Greenwich Village, that I still live here, that I was born and raised here, and it's my home. I've always lived within a couple of square blocks of Washington Square Park, and therefore Bleecker Bob's was a part of my life from the moment I could read the sign on the store, look at the cool adults inside, and say, wow, this is me at like first grade. Can't wait till I'm old enough to go in there and hang out and buy albums with those people. And then Bob himself. I've been seeing this all across social media. I guess I thought I was somehow special in the way that he had this really paternal way with me, in a ball-busting sense, that, the moment I got too big for my britches, whether it be about my musical knowledge, my eventual career in music and in radio, he would always cut me down to size and then immediately see when I was really down and turn things around and be just really encouraging, really genuine. He was just the realest guy in the world. Bleecker Bob, otherwise known as Robert Plotnik. He's the guy who first played me the Jam, sold me my first Sex Pistols album, got me into Japanese imports of David Bowie. He just played a really oversized role in my life for the first few decades, really up until 2013 when Bleecker Bob's closed. I'd stop by and say hi. In 2001, he became rather ill. I believe he had a stroke then. And today when he died, his health was poor. He was, I believe, 76 years old. My last great memory of Bob actually ties into another topic I've discussed on this show once or twice, which is when I was producing a show for Westwood One hosted by David Brenner. And in trying to make the show fun, one of the ideas that Brenner and I came up with together was to get IDs from local New York characters who might be famous enough that, this was a national syndicated show. So while it was very New York centric, what if it could be someone that even someone driving around in Kansas City would recognize? And my first thought was, let me go get some of those IDs from Bob. Bob is a very well-known character. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but he'd been a plot on an episode of Seinfeld by that time. I just thought everybody knows Bleecker Bob's. It's where Robert Plant used to buy his albums, Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, Matt Sager. You were in rarefied air when you were in Bleecker Bob's. You were also in very dusty air, but that was part of the charm. What he did for the culture, what he did for Greenwich Village, what he did for the music industry, and for the art of collecting and selling LPs. We are in a different time. I'm grateful for the years that I had Bob in my life, that I had his store in my life, and the years after his stroke that he was able to still get around and be functional and, enjoy life to the extent that he ever did. He was, this was part of his personality, a bit of a put on, but some of the curmudgeon that anyone who knew Bleecker Bob is familiar with, some of that was genuine. Much of it, though, I always believed, especially if you ever caught him in those moments when he saw you feeling down, came up and encouraged you. There was no way you could think anything other than that some of the curmudgeon stuff was just so that he doesn't become everyone's favorite little neighborhood mascot. As New York became gentrified, Bob never cleaned up the store, never fell in line, never stopped being himself. So the extent to which he'll be missed by me, by the city, it's pretty much indescribable. He was a cultural touchstone and just a kind human being. There's far too little of both of those to go around, and so the loss of Bleecker Bob really cuts me like a knife, and you'll be missed, sir. I've got to find those IDs of Bleecker Bob where he's saying, hey, I'm Bleecker Bob. Welcome back to the David Brenner Show. Get out of here, Matt. I'm done with you. I use so many of those. He kept saying, find me New York personalities. Find me New York personalities. And, other than Bob, it was hard to think of, I'm going to go talk to the soup Nazi? Bleecker Bob is around the corner from my apartment. He's the most fun, engaging, entertaining guy I know. But it got to a point where Brenner said, all right, enough with the Bleecker Bob. Find me some other wacky New York characters. There was no character like Bleecker Bob. That is why his loss is an irreplaceable one. The store itself shuttered its doors in 2013, but knowing that Bob was around, in my case, really just like right around the corner in the neighborhood, it's sad. It's a very depressing way in which to enter the weekend. But he had a wonderful life, touched a lot of lives, including mine. all over social media, I'm seeing stories just like mine, where I got my first Joan Jett album there. I sold my first album collection there before I moved, bought my first Sex Pistols t-shirt there. I mean, it was a big part of many people's lives. I don't think I really appreciated that at the time, living around the corner from it as I did. It was my local corner record store, and I never fully appreciated up till just this moment how very, very lucky I was for that. Rest in power, Bob. You were and continue to be loved. So now, having gotten that off my chest, I cannot go into the weekend on a morose note. So I do have really good news. Joss Whedon's television shows, which were never appreciated by Fox or UPN or whichever network they happened to be on at the time. In fact, Fox basically murdered Firefly. From the very first episode, they, instead of airing the pilot, aired episode 2 first. Just so that when the next week rolled around, they had an excuse to say, hey, the numbers aren't looking so good. And Joss would say, yeah, because there's an episode that establishes who these characters are and tells their origin story and gets you interested in them and draws you into the plot, and you wouldn't let me air it. And then just a couple years later, they came crawling back to Joss saying, oh, come on, do a movie, do a movie, do a movie. And he, of course, did Serenity. But Buffy and Angel, two of the most influential classic television shows of the last half century. Something that's interesting about them, if you go back and watch now, is that every season, Whedon was prepared for that to be his last. He was extremely conscious and was apparently told very frequently behind the scenes, hey, you better get ready to wrap it up. We're probably going to cancel you this season. So every season he would do his best to flesh out the storyline, expand the universe, introduce new characters, and develop new character arcs for pre-existing characters, but always with the knowledge that the season finale could very well end up being the series finale. And so that was how he fell into the practice of having each season being taken over by a big bad. You know, one overarching villain against which Buffy and her gang of the Scoobies would have to fight. And in so doing, try and reveal as much about the characters, try and draw out elements of the characters that neither the audience nor the characters themselves had witnessed before. But again, doing it all around this big bad villain, because for all we know, once they beat the villain in the season finale, that will be the last time we ever see these characters. Now, of course, we know that these very underappreciated in their own time shows are now classics. They're rebooting Buffy. Joss Whedon is literally turning down offers of billion-dollar movie contracts to direct for Marvel, Warner Brothers, DC, what have you. He just wants a break from it all. He's so hot right now. But those three shows, Buffy, Angel, my personal favorite. Not quite sure why. Although, as Joss Whedon himself will tell you, the real thesis of Angel, not the character. The character himself, as introduced in Buffy, had the most awesome description for David Boreanaz, who came to audition and eventually land the role. What Whedon told him, rather than saying he's a vampire, he's 200 years old, he did some awful stuff, then some more awful stuff happened to him, then he got a soul, spoilers, sorry, and then falls in love with Buffy, possibly gets a spinoff. Instead, what he told David Boreanaz at the audition was, think of this character as a boxer who's been in thousands and thousands of battles. Each time he's been knocked down, knocked out, and each time he's gotten back up. That is how we ended up with the brilliantly portrayed Angel of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who was so well received that by season 3 of Buffy, they were like, all right, we need to do a spinoff. He's got to leave the show. Hopefully Buffy will be okay without him, and of course she was. So Buffy, Angel, and Firefly, the big three, the ones that made Joss a household name, they are now airing for free every episode of each series, airing for free on Facebook. Now, there will be ads, little ad rolls mid-episode, which, you know, given my own podcast, I can hardly throw aspersions at that. I open and close with a very, very short ad myself, although if you look at my Patreon page, patreon.com/Matt Sager, you'll note that you can buy special commercial-free versions of my show. But forget about my show for a moment. Buffy, Angel, and Firefly, so classic, so influential, and admittedly, they did so much to transform television and the way stories are told and the way characters are developed and portrayed, that in hindsight, some of these shows, particularly Buffy Season 1, which was admittedly rocky, Joss had a hard time securing a budget. He was being told constantly by the WB that, listen, any one of these episodes could be the last, so wrap it up. And that's why season 1 is plagued with, first of all, very low-budget set pieces and cheesy monsters and stuff like that, because he didn't even have a guarantee at that point that he could close out season 1. Now, of course, it became a smash surprise hit in season 2, and then the ratings began a bit of a tailspin from which they never really recovered, which is interesting because the billions of people who continue to love this series, it was just bad timing. Like, as Buffy matured and as Angel's spinoff show matured, Americans were falling in love with reality TV, which is about as far from the storytelling powers of Joss Whedon as you can get. We were just headed in opposite cultural directions, and it was bad timing. Although, things worked out fine for Joss. I believe it was the season premiere of season 4 of Buffy, in which Xander, desperately bored from not having had monsters to fight all summer long, gets hints of possible monstrous activity, and he says to the gang, "Come on, everybody, Avengers assemble." So Joss, he knew what his destiny was. He pulled it all off, and the roots of all that, along with the roots of many of the shows that followed, stuff like Battlestar Galactica, all the way to Westworld, none of these things would have happened without Joss Whedon, and specifically not without Buffy, Angel, and Firefly. Buffy, of course, begins her life as a high school student who happens to be the chosen vampire slayer. In every generation, one is chosen, and it came from this brilliant idea that Whedon had, a simple but genius idea. What would happen if a young girl went down a dark alley and was followed by a monster, and instead of screaming and a corpse being found the next day, what if she beat the living shit out of the monster and walked out, dusted her hands, and went home? And from that, along with his love for comic characters like the X-Men's Kitty Pryde, Buffy was born, and Buffy became such a fully inhabited universe so quickly. And Boreanaz, as I said, was so brilliant as Angel that a spin-off series was ordered quite quickly for him, one which spent only a little bit of time on the WB network, as it was called then, before moving over to UPN while Buffy stayed on the WB, which confused people and helped neither show's ratings. But Angel, a 237-year-old vampire, who began life as a sort of scoundrel layabout, not unlike myself and undoubtedly some of you, before falling prey to a beautiful vampire named Darla. And as a vampire, he was among the worst in all history. He was a monster's monster, one to be feared, a guy for whom evil was an art. There were whole chapters in Buffy's books about vampires that were dedicated specifically to him and all the horror he'd caused. And yet they ended up falling in love, and that led to tragedy, and not going to spoil too much, but suffice it to say, Angel gets a spinoff in which he takes on the forces of evil in a really interesting way, in a way that doesn't sound like it would make sense, but honestly, it really does. Angel was, again, it's my favorite of Joss Whedon's shows. It was, Whedon has described it as a love letter to humanity, and I can see that now. That's really clear in watching the episodes. The idea of redemption, the idea of never giving up on anyone, this constant drive to help people in need and protect the weak and helpless. Buffy and Angel were both superhero shows long before we had stuff like The Flash, Arrow, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and in many ways a more pure, action-packed, raw, and exciting and unpredictable form of superhero show, even though the superheroes were high school students and vampires, and the supervillains, in many cases, were professors, and then later on in Angel, lawyers. It's a whole thing, but once you get into it, I promise you, this is as addictive as television gets. Buffy had 7 seasons, Angel had 5, whereas Firefly sadly had the 1, but again, you can find them all. You can watch them for free, and you can hold watch parties, and in fact, that is a big part of why they've been made available for free, is that Facebook really wants to tout its watch party feature. But you can use that to show all your friends, hey, I'm watching season 2, episode 13 of Angel, come join me. And you'd best believe you can find me doing that on Facebook, probably sometime this weekend if I have the time, which admittedly, I don't know that I do. I've made fun of people for just this, but I am already starting to buy my Christmas presents. I just know that forearmed is forewarned. I've got so many picky friends and incredibly picky family members who I love dearly and who I want to get them something that I know they're going to love. So I'll be out doing that, as well as doing my Pilates. I cry your pardon if I've been talking a little bit too much about my work at the gym lately. It is where I spend a ton of time nowadays, especially since, the other thing I'm doing this weekend, knock on wood here, got a date on Bumble. So shopping, working out hard, and then a date to pay myself back for all that hard work. How about you? What do you got going on this weekend? Let me know. Contact me via email, matt@mattsager.com, or call 646-535-4788. You can also hit me up on Twitter @MattSager. Check out my Instagram, Real Matt Sager, and on Facebook, where you can find me watching Buffy, Angel, and Firefly. I'm the Matt Sager. I've also got a voiceover page there, Matt Sager VO, and this podcast page is Matt Sager Podcast. You can also check out my Patreon and my new merch store from my friends at wehavemerch.com. Check out the links in the description for tonight's podcast episode. And for more, my articles and blog posts, voiceover reels, contact info, more back episode archives of this podcast, and much more, go to mattsagervoiceover.com.